Most people would never believe this, but a Bigfoot could save a grieving widow during a storm. In the late 1980s, deep in the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas, a 62-year-old woman named Elaine Duvall, who had lost both her husband and son, discovered something extraordinary after a violent storm. A strange, wounded creature, barely clinging to life, crying out by the creek. It wasn't just a myth. It was a young Bigfoot. But the real shock? They didn't come alone. For nights after, she heard 3 slow, rhythmic knocks echoing through the woods. And on her porch appeared odd gifts. Rings of river stones, braided grass, fresh pine shoots. Bigfoot doesn't live alone. They have family, they have rituals, and they repay kindness based on 27 eyewitness reports and unpublished ranger logs. This story reveals what no one tells you about America's most mysterious creature. In this video, you'll uncover the real meaning behind the 3 knocks, the ancient code of gratitude these beings follow, and the chilling moment a hunter dropped his gun and fled into the night. Elaine didn't just save a creature, she gained a new family. And if you think Bigfoot is just a fairy tale, wait until you hear how they said goodbye. Watch to the end, before the knocking begins again. The storm rolled in before sundown. Not the loud kind with lightning that split the sky wide open, but the creeping kind, thick, gray, unhurried, soaking everything in its path. The clouds dragged low over the Ouachita pines, pressing silence down on the old forest, heavy as regret. Elaine Duvall sat hunched in her rocker by the oil lamp, the dim flame flickering across her fingers as she worked the needle through the frayed edge of a woolen blanket. The same blanket she'd stitched the night before her son drowned. Her thumb paused, tracing the thread. She still remembered the way his little feet used to curl beneath it, how he once called it his invisible cave. The wind wheezed through the warped seams in the cabin wall. One of the loose tin sheets on the roof clattered like a rusty bell. Rain began to tap the window pane in uneven rhythms, like someone unsure whether to knock or turn away. She didn't glance up. The photo of her husband sat near the kerosene burner, its frame slightly warped from age. Marine Corps, Vietnam. The smile in the picture had always seemed forced, like it knew something terrible waited just beyond the shutter click. Next to it was the boy's wooden bowl, still dusty from the last time she'd tried to convince herself to throw it out. But grief doesn't rot. It settles. It becomes furniture. Copper stirred beside the fire, his head lifting just enough to catch a scent through the draft. His ears perked, alert, the way he used to be when he was younger, when the river was still a playground and not a grave. Then it came. A sound too soft to be a scream, too long to be wind. It rose and fell like a thread pulled through cloth, thin, aching, distant. A cry, not of a bird, not of any creature she'd known in her decades here, not even the dying sort of cry a fox makes when it's caught in a snare. No, this was searching, wounded, small. Elaine stiffened. Copper growled low. No bark, just a tight, rumbling vibration from his chest. She rose slowly, the floorboards complaining underfoot. Her hands brushed her cardigan pockets. No phone, no flashlight. No use for them here. She grabbed the oil lantern, shielding the wick from the draft with her palm, and stepped to the window. The trees across the clearing trembled, but the cry didn't come from them. It came from deeper, somewhere down near the gorge where the creek swelled. For a moment, she didn't move. She looked instead at the thin threads of her own breath fogging the glass. Thought about the grave under the cedar out back. Thought about the years she had spent not forgiving herself. No one's ever really lost, she whispered. Not if someone's still willing to look. Then she opened the door. The night rushed in cold and wild. Copper was already out, moving stiff-legged toward the edge of the porch, nose high. The rain soaked his fur almost instantly, but he didn't seem to care. Elaine followed him with slow, steady steps. Each board on the porch groaned a note under her boots. The lantern hissed. Somewhere far off, Too faint to be real, she thought she heard it again. 3 dull knocks, spread out like distant thunder. 1, 2, 3. She froze. But the wind took it. Might have been the woods shifting, might have been her memory playing tricks. She'd heard worse in her dreams. She shook it off. They followed the slope behind the cabin, where the ground turned to black loam and pine needles. Copper stayed ahead, silent, drawn like a compass needle. The trail narrowed and dipped toward the edge of the creek. Trees leaned in from both sides, their branches heavy with wet, their trunks like watching things. The water below roared louder now. Swollen from the rain, the creek was no longer a gentle stream. It was a heaving, mud-colored thing, swallowing branches and pushing waves against the jagged rocks. Elaine held the lantern up high, straining to see past the brush. That's when she saw it. A small, dark figure clung to a floating branch caught in a whirlpool near a fallen log. Soaked through, barely visible, its fur plastered to its body in trembling clumps. Eyes wide, yellow, terrified. She didn't even have time to process what she was looking at. Copper shot forward. "No!" she cried, but it was too late. The old dog leapt from the bank like a bullet, disappearing into the dark rush of water. The lantern shook in her hand. She stumbled after him, heart pounding in her ears, skidding down the slope to the edge. Her boots slipped in the mud. Her breath snagged in her throat. Copper broke the surface 10 feet downstream. Jaws clenched around the back of the small creature's neck. Not biting, just holding. The way he used to with driftwood and duck decoys. Years of training, of bloodline memory, surged in him like he'd never aged. But the current was brutal. It slammed them both into the eddy, twisting them around the root system of a downed pine. Copper kicked with his hind legs, straining to stay upright. The creature flailed, too weak to help. Elaine dropped the lantern near the tree base, the flame flickering wildly inside the glass, and waded into the water. It was freezing, the kind that steals your breath. She pushed against the current, teeth gritted, gripping a thick root with one hand, reaching for Copper with the other. "Hold on, baby," she gasped. Come on, come on." Copper reached her first. His body shook violently, but his grip on the creature never loosened. Elaine grabbed the scruff of its fur and hauled with all the strength she had left. Together they crashed back onto the muddy bank, tangled in roots and limbs in shivers. The creature coughed, a wet, gurgling sound. Mud streamed from its nose. Its eyes, too human to be anything she could explain, locked on hers. It didn't try to run. It didn't even flinch. Copper collapsed beside it, wheezing, tail thumping once. Elaine cradled the small body in her lap, brushing the soaked fur away from its forehead. Beneath the matted strands was skin, soft, gray-brown, warm under her touch. Not a bear, not a monkey, not something she'd ever seen, but it was a child. She didn't know how she knew that, only that she did. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're safe." The creature blinked. Behind its ear, something glinted red. She pulled its arm gently into the lantern light and saw it. Deep in the fur, a ragged tear ringed in blood. Metal had touched this being. A sharp, man-made snare. Flesh caught and pulled. It was no accident. Somebody tried to trap it. Elaine's hand trembled. "No," she murmured. "Not again. I won't lose another one." She pressed her palm over the wound as the wind surged around them. Pine needles danced in the stormlight. In the dark, beyond the water, the trees watched silently. And somewhere, maybe not so far this time, she heard it again. 3 knocks, slower, closer. Then the lantern blew out. The storm had settled into a relentless rhythm by the time they reached the cabin, steady, cold, and unforgiving. Rain hit the tin roof like a drumbeat without tempo. Darkness had bled into every corner of the clearing, and the oil lamp flickered on the porch where Elaine had left it. Now dimmer, haloed in fog, as though struggling to hold on to warmth. Her clothes clung heavy to her back, soaked through from the creek. Her hands trembled, not from the cold alone, but from the weight of the thing she now cradled like a wet newborn in a tangle of flannel and disbelief. Copper limped beside her, drenched and dragging, eyes half closed but locked protectively on the small shape in her arms. He hadn't let go once, not when the water tried to take them both, not when her own grip faltered in the current. He'd bitten down into the creature's thick neck fur, not cruelly, not even tightly, just firmly enough to keep it above the waterline. He'd remembered the instincts from another life, another river, another boy. The old retriever blood still ran strong under the gray muzzle and arthritic legs. They reached the kitchen floor with a thud. Elaine dropped to her knees on the worn linoleum, the air thick with steam rising from the creature's fur, and her own breath fogging the lantern glass. Her fingers, raw and numb, fumbled to unwrap the soggy blanket. The creature, so small up close, barely the size of a 5-year-old, lay motionless except for the faint shiver that passed through its limbs every few seconds. Its chest rose in jerky rhythms. Its mouth opened just slightly, showing small, human-like teeth. But those eyes, golden and wide, they were what undid her. "Stay with me," she whispered, more to herself than it. "Stay here, baby." The wound on its arm had deepened, ragged, lined with broken fur and swollen flesh. She recognized the shape, a spring trap, the old kind with jagged jaws. Not an accident, not a fall. It had been caught, hunted, maybe escaped, maybe released, but not before it tore away bleeding. She lit another lantern, setting it low near the stove. The cast iron pot from that morning's tea still sat on the burner. She filled it again, this time with clean water. Dropped in a handful of dried pine pitch from the tin on the shelf. Then yarrow, comfrey. Herbs she hadn't used in years, maybe not since the boy. The steam turned fragrant, cutting through the damp air like memory. She tore strips from a linen apron, dipped them, wrung them out, and started cleaning the wound. The creature flinched, but didn't fight. Its eyes stayed open, watching her, trusting her. "You're hurt bad," she said gently, "but I think you'll make it." She worked slowly, mindful of the torn tissue. The old motions returned easily, like the ones she'd once done for scraped knees and swollen ankles. For a moment, it felt like no time had passed at all. Copper circled once, then dropped beside them, letting his body rest against the creature's other side. He gave a low woof, then rested his chin on his paws. His tail flicked weakly once. The message was clear. He wasn't going anywhere. Elaine leaned back and studied the creature's face. It was still shivering, still in shock, but it was no longer gasping. Its breathing had slowed, stabilized. The wet fur had begun to puff as it dried. She could see the contours now, long limbs, narrow shoulders, oversized hands with thick knuckles and fingers that looked half-built for climbing, half-built for prayer. A juvenile, not a deformed bear, not anything she'd read in field guides, something older, wiser, and afraid. She stood slowly, careful not to startle it. Poured a shallow bowl of warm broth, just oats and pine needle tea, thinned with rainwater, and crouched again. "Here," she said, holding a spoonful up to its lips. The creature blinked. It didn't move. "It's all right. You've had worse tonight." She brought the spoon closer. After a long, still second, the creature parted its lips and took the broth, swallowed, shivered again, then opened its mouth slightly as if to ask for more. Elaine smiled despite herself. "That's right, that's better." The rain still whispered against the roof. Copper dozed, half alert. Elaine fed the creature until it refused another spoonful, then wrapped the clean blanket tighter around it. The lantern light warmed the walls, casting long shadows across the shelves, shapes that danced between pine branches, tin cups, and the old photo frames lined above the fireplace. The silence had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore, just waiting. She looked down at the small being curled against her dog, and something caught in her throat. A name rose, Not from reason or memory, but something simpler, instinctive. "Huck," she said softly. The creature's eyes flicked up to meet hers. "Huck," she repeated. "That's who you are." It didn't protest, didn't shift, just blinked once, slow and deliberate, like the trees sometimes did when the wind moved through them. Elaine leaned back against the cabinet, knees drawn up. Her fingers played absently with a loose thread in the blanket. She could feel the warmth of the stove slowly pushing away the cold, could hear the old tick in the pipes that always came before the kettle boiled. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in that cabin. Copper lifted his head. His ears twitched. Outside, past the porch, somewhere in the trees, a sound stirred. Not the wind, not the creak of pine trunks. 3 knocks. Clear, spaced, low. Elaine's breath caught. She didn't move. Neither did Copper. Huck stirred slightly, eyes now open again. She didn't imagine it. Not this time. She rose carefully and crossed the room, pushed aside the curtain on the front window. Rain blurred the glass. Shadows stretched long across the clearing. There was no one there. But on the porch, just visible under the edge of the overhang, was something strange. A drag mark in the mud. Long, wide, leading up from the slope toward the door. And caught at the bottom of the step, barely hanging, was a tuft of coarse, dark fur. Elaine stared at it, then turned slowly, glancing toward the bundle on her floor. Huck's eyes were open, following her, watching, trusting. She knelt again, reached out, touched its face. Her voice was soft, shaking slightly. "I won't let anything take you." A gust of wind pushed at the cabin. The fire flared. The rain thickened. And for just a breath, she swore she felt something pressing back, not threatening, but present. Something ancient just outside, listening. Something that had come close enough to see the porch light, and then had stepped back into the dark. The knock was not a warning. It was a signal. The storm had worn itself down to a cold drizzle by morning, the kind that soaks into the bones without making a sound. Mist curled low around the treetops, moving like smoke between the branches, and the sky above the Ouachitas was the color of wet ash. Inside the cabin, the air was warm, laced with pine smoke and the soft, resinous scent of herbs simmering gently on the stove. The fire hadn't gone out. Neither had Elaine. She sat at the edge of the bed, a faded quilt wrapped tight around her shoulders, watching Huck sleep. He lay curled beside the hearth, just inches from Copper, his breathing finally steady, no longer ragged or shallow. The thick wool blanket hugged his small frame, now dried and brushed clean of river mud. Beneath the fur, bruises had started to bloom, faint but real. The wound on his arm was hidden beneath layers of pine pitch and clean linen, tied off with the last good strip from her old apron. And though he still flinched now and then in his sleep, the way an injured animal does, he hadn't tried to escape. Not once. Elaine watched the rise and fall of his back, how his fingers twitched slightly in the folds of the blanket. She didn't know what he dreamed, or if he even dreamed the way people did, but he looked peaceful now, young, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. She rose quietly and ladled the last of the herbal broth into a chipped ceramic bowl. When she returned, Copper had already lifted his head, ears flicked toward her, tail thumping once. Huck stirred too, eyes cracking open, still hazy but aware. She knelt beside him. "Easy," she said, voice low and gentle. "It's warm. It'll help." He didn't shy away as she brought the spoon toward him again. This time, he leaned slightly forward, met the edge with his lips, drank. His hands, still clumsy with fatigue, reached out to steady the bowl. Their fingers touched. His skin was rough, leathery in some places, soft in others, calloused like he'd known climbing, scratched like he'd known underbrush. Elaine didn't pull away. "You're safe here," she said. Huck's golden eyes met hers, and something in them changed. Not fear, Not confusion, just stillness. The kind of stillness you only see in wild things after a long chase. That breath between terror and trust. She sat with him while he ate. Copper shifted closer, laying his head gently on Huck's thigh. A slow exhale left the dog's body, as if signaling something understood. Huck paused, then placed one small hand on Copper's head, uncertain at first, then firmer. A quiet bond sealed in fur and warmth and silence. Later, she brought out her old medicine box, the one she hadn't opened since before the accident. Inside, herbs dried and crumbled with age, yarrow, plantain, dried lavender wrapped in wax paper. She showed Huck each one, laying them gently on the table near the light. "This one helps with pain," she said, pointing to a bundle of comfrey. "And this pulls out infection." Huck watched her hands more than her words, mimicked her motions with small, deliberate movements. His fingers, though thick and tipped with short nails, handled the leaves with surprising care. When she crushed a pinch of dried yarrow between her palms and lifted it to her nose, he did the same. Elaine smiled. The kettle whistled. The cabin filled with steam again. She poured 2 mugs, one for herself, one left on the floor near Huck, though he didn't touch it. Instead, he reached out, slowly, and touched the corner of the blanket, the one she'd wrapped him in, the one with the blue stitching. Her hands stilled. "That belonged to my boy," she said softly. Huck didn't look up, but he didn't pull away either. He traced the edge of the fabric with his finger. Elaine's eyes stung. "I lost him a long time ago. Down by the river. He was playing. I looked away for a moment, and..." She didn't finish. The wind scratched faintly at the shutters. Copper gave a quiet sigh, shifting his weight. "I blamed myself," she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Still do, I guess. That's why I stayed here. Couldn't stand to be where people talked like they knew what grief should look like." She wiped her hands on her apron. "I never got to hold him again. Not really. Just an empty blanket and a piece of driftwood they pulled from the current." Huck turned to her, head tilted slightly, as if he understood more than words. She reached out, brushed his tangled fur back from his brow. "I should have gone after him. Should have jumped in first like you did, Copper." The dog blinked slowly, unmoving. Elaine sat back, hands in her lap. "That's what I promised myself. If anything ever cried from that river again, I'd listen." Huck's eyes were steady now. Not afraid, just present, like he'd been listening the whole time. The room quieted again. Outside, the mist had thickened. The trees were barely shapes now, gray on gray. Elaine rose to draw the curtains, but something on the porch caught her eye. 3 smooth stones sat in a circle near the door. In their center, a sprig of fresh pine. Still damp, still green, not placed by chance. Her breath hitched. She opened the door slowly, stepping barefoot onto the wood. The cold cut through her instantly, but she didn't move. The stones glistened under the soft rain. The pine sprig rested perfectly upright. A gift, a message, or both. She knelt, fingers hovering above it. The scent of sap was sharp, fresh, alive. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Behind her, Huck had moved closer. Standing now in the doorway, silent. Copper beside him, both watching. Elaine didn't turn around. Instead, she whispered to the wind, "I see you." The trees didn't respond, not with sound. But something moved, just at the edge of sight. A shimmer, a shadow slipping behind bark. She rose and walked back inside. Closed the door, left the stones untouched. That night, when the fire had dimmed and the cabin returned to its hush, she tucked Huck into the bedroll beside the hearth. Copper curled behind him like a sentinel, breathing slow and even. The storm had passed, but the air still carried a charge. Like the moment before a deer steps into the open. She poured herself a final mug of tea, sat in the rocking chair, and let the silence wrap around her like a shawl. Outside, deep in the trees, something shifted again. 3 soft knocks. This time, she didn't flinch. The morning light broke slow and sour, filtered through a sky still swollen with leftover rain. Fog hung low across the trees, thick and unmoving, as if the woods themselves weren't ready to wake. Elaine stood barefoot on the porch, a chipped mug of bitter chicory steaming in her hands. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every creak of the old cabin, every rustle from the trees had her ears cocked, eyes scanning shadows. She looked down. There, just off the bottom stair, a mark dragged across the dirt like something had passed close in the night. Not animal-like. Wider, heavier, as if someone had paced back and forth. A chill crept beneath her sweater. She followed the track with her eyes, past the tree line, out where the fog thickened. That's when she saw it, caught on a rusted strand of fence near the back edge of her lot. A dark tuft of fur, tangled and coarse, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. Fresh. She knew her woods. She knew what belonged and what didn't. This didn't. She set the mug down without drinking and stepped carefully toward the trees. Copper padded beside her, silent and alert, nose twitching in slow jerks. He caught the scent first. Head snapped up, ears forward. A low sound rolled from his throat. Not fear. Recognition. Huck stood in the doorway, wrapped in the same blanket she'd covered him with last night, eyes locked on her every move. He didn't come closer, but he didn't step back either. Just watched. Elaine crouched beside the fence post. The fur was dark. Too dark for deer, too long for bear, and not matted like a wild dog. Clean. Brushed even. Like something had taken care of it. She reached for it, hesitated, then plucked it free and folded it into her palm. Down in the soil below, a print lingered. Deep, not boot, not hoof. 5 toes, wide set, as long as her forearm. She swallowed hard. This was no dream. She turned slowly, eyes tracing the perimeter of her clearing, but the fog refused to give anything up. Still, she could feel it now, like the trees were watching back. Later that day, she hitched her truck up the ridge into town, the old tires slipping in the wet gravel. Mina was quiet, always was after storms. Loose tin flapped on the roof of the feed store, and the windows of the diner blinked with neon that hummed against the silence. Elaine parked by the post office and walked toward the general store. On the corner near the stacked propane tanks, a voice called out, "You see anything strange out your way, Miss Duvall?" Roy Haskins leaned against the hood of his truck, one boot propped, a toothpick rolling between his lips. His eyes were red-rimmed and sharp, not from drink, yet, but from curiosity wrapped in something leaner, hungrier. Elaine didn't break stride. "Define strange," she said. Roy chuckled, low and pointed. "Storm shakes up more than trees sometimes. Heard folks over by Dry Creek say they saw shadows running through their orchard. Thought it was coyotes, till they found fence posts pulled clean from the earth." She paused just before the door, looked back at him. Maybe the earth got tired of holding? Roy's grin twitched just once, then dropped. Inside the store, she grabbed what she needed. Rock salt, coffee, gauze. She paid in cash and spoke little. But as she turned to leave, she caught Roy watching her from outside through the window glass. His eyes narrowed, scanning the bags in her arms like he was taking inventory of something bigger than supplies. He'd seen the change, and he'd smelled the smoke. Back home, the cabin was quiet again. Huck hadn't moved from the hearth. Copper lay beside him, their breathing matching now, synced in some rhythm older than words. Elaine unpacked the supplies, set the gauze beside the stove, checked the boughs near the porch again. Still just 3 stones and the faint shape of a heel where someone, or something, had stood close the night before. But there was something else now. A new offering. Atop the stones sat a fresh sprig of pine, tucked with purpose, and underneath it, a small bone. Clean, hollow, placed, not dropped. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. That night, As the fire dimmed and the last of the chicory burned black in her cup, she sat in the rocker by the window and let the wind speak. It whistled through the shutters in that same old way, but under it now was something quieter, the sound of pacing, of presence, like something walked just beyond the edge of what she could see, circling, checking, waiting. Then it stopped. 3 knocks, this time closer. This time, not alone. Copper lifted his head, but didn't growl. His tail beat once. Huck stirred beside him, blinked slowly, then turned his face toward the window. Something in his posture changed. Not alarm, recognition. Elaine stood and stepped to the porch. The air outside was colder than before. Still. Not a breeze moved, but the trees seemed to lean toward her, as if bending to listen. On the step were 3 fresh stones. Beside them, a pine cone cracked neatly in half, and inside, a feather curled into its core, white with a black tip. Behind her, Huck's voice came. Small, low, not quite a word, but not a growl either. A breath between sounds. She turned. He stood in the doorway now, barefoot, upright, eyes wide. Copper walked to him, nudged his leg, then looked toward the woods. Something was watching, something that had not come closer, not yet. Roy's truck rolled past 2 days later. Slow, too slow for coincidence. She watched him from the woodshed, hammer paused mid-swing. He didn't stop, but he looked. Not a wave, not a nod. Just a long, slow look through the trees, like he already knew what he'd find if he stopped and opened his door. She waited until he disappeared down the hill before walking back inside. That night, when the 3 knocks came again, she wasn't surprised. But this time, they were answered. Not from her side, from the trees. 3 more! Then, silence. The air carried a softness that morning, though nothing about it was still. Mist still licked the grass behind the cabin, curling up over the porch and into the trees like memory. But the cold had eased, giving way to that subtle shift that comes after long rain. The scent of wet bark, overturned soil, and pine. Elaine stepped into the clearing barefoot, mug in hand, eyes adjusting to the dimness between trunks. The earth felt slick and soft beneath her feet. But the woods no longer felt like they were watching. They felt expectant. There on the porch, waiting like it had always been, sat another offering. This time, it was different. A rough loop of braided reeds, uneven and damp, shaped by hands that had never been taught but still knew. Tucked in its center were 2 smooth creek stones and a young sprig of cedar. She stared at it for a long moment. A ring, crude and deliberate. Not just a gift, but a gesture, maybe a kind of answer. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Copper stepped down first, stiff joints creaking, nose twitching. Huck followed slowly, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket but standing taller now. He paused beside her, eyes fixed on the ring like he understood its weight. Then, without looking at her, he knelt, one knee on the damp wood, and reached out to touch it. He didn't take it. He just touched the center stone, one finger pressing gently like it was a memory he didn't want to disturb. Then he rose, silent, eyes flicking to hers for a brief moment before turning toward the woods. His face calm, his breath even. Not afraid. Elaine bent and picked up the ring. It was damp and clumsily made, but strong. The knots tight, the edges tucked. Whoever had made it cared enough to finish it. She held it in both hands, cradled it like something sacred. And maybe it was. Later that morning, while the sun stayed tucked behind high clouds and the trees dripped from every branch, she watched from the kitchen window as Copper and Huck played beneath the pines. Not loud, not rough, just moving through the undergrowth together in that quiet, non-verbal way old friends do. Huck would reach for a low branch. Copper would dart past with his tail high. Sometimes they circled each other. Sometimes they just sat near the edge of the slope, watching the creek, unmoving. There were no words between them, but there was language. That afternoon, she brought out her old herb books, the ones with pages gone soft and yellow at the edges. She showed Huck how to press leaves between stones, how to strip bark for salves. They knelt on the floor while the stove popped and steamed, and the smell of comfrey and pine gum filled the room. He watched her hands, copied her fingers, even smelled the broken stems the way she did. When she taught him to listen for the sound of wind moving through the needles, he tilted his head like a fox, eyes closing, breath slowing. Every few hours, she checked the porch. Always something new. A line of stones, now curved. A feather, still warm from whatever body it had left. Sometimes pine cones, cracked clean and laid in pairs. She never took them. Not yet. She understood now. This was a conversation, and she didn't want to interrupt. But there was something else that began to change, too. Not in the woods. In town. It started with rumors again. A dog gone missing. A fence torn open by something that didn't leave claw marks but left deep, deliberate prints. People said they saw shapes moving in the woods. Big ones. Fast ones. Someone's chicken coop was ripped open. Someone else heard whistles at night. And then Roy came back. He stood outside her cabin near sundown. One boot planted in the soft dirt. Arms crossed. Eyes scanning the tree line behind her house like he owned it. The way his lips twitched beneath the scruff of his beard made it clear he knew more than he said. "You been feeding anything out here?" he asked. Elaine didn't answer. Roy stepped closer. "Only reason I'm asking is 'cause I followed some prints out past Old Shaw's Ridge. They headed straight toward this property. And you got more prints out back than I've seen in a decade. Some of them small." She stared at him. And maybe you know something," he said. "Maybe you've seen something that'd be worth knowing. Or selling." He spit into the grass and didn't blink. "I set a few traps along the slope," he added. "Don't want anything sneaking up too close. Safety, you understand?" Copper growled low from the porch. Roy didn't flinch. "If you find anything caught, don't worry. I'll come back and check." Elaine watched him walk away, the tailpipe of his truck coughing twice as it vanished down the trail. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she followed Copper into the woods with a flashlight wrapped in red cellophane. Just enough glow to see where her boots landed. Huck stayed close behind her, barefoot and alert, stepping soft, ears tuned. They found the first trap near the edge of the fence. Old, rusted iron teeth curled like a dead man's smile. She disarmed it carefully, gloves on, then buried it in a cedar root hollow. She didn't speak. The second was deeper in, placed low in the moss, baited with raw meat. Huck didn't flinch, but he made a sound. A deep, almost inaudible hum, like something from inside his chest. Not a warning, not fear, just sorrow. They found 5 more. She took them all, buried them deep where water would carry them far away. And that night, when they returned to the cabin, the porch had changed again. A new ring of reeds, this time tighter, centered. Inside it, a feather, but not from any bird she'd seen. Long, translucent at the tip, light as breath. She touched it gently and left it there. But somewhere in the woods, someone else had noticed the missing traps. By morning, the old trail behind the cabin had new prints. Boots. Heavy. Paired with them, fresh scratches on a tree trunk, like something had been pushed hard. Or fought back. Roy had returned. And he hadn't come alone. The night came down slow and heavy, folding over the trees like a thick wool blanket. Every sound in the forest felt closer than it should have been. Too crisp, too deliberate. The wind wasn't moving, but the woods still whispered, as if some ancient breath passed between the branches. Elaine stood by the front door, her hand resting on the wood like it could feel something through the grain. She wasn't cold. She wasn't afraid. But every part of her was awake. Copper stood at her side, hackles lifted, a low hum pushing through his chest like a warning too old for barking. Huck lingered just behind them, barefoot, still and alert, his body almost part of the shadows now, one hand braced lightly on the door frame. He hadn't made a sound in hours. Then the stillness cracked. A sharp bark tore through the dark from somewhere out back. Not Copper's voice. A different dog. A stranger's voice. Coarse, frantic, loud. Then another bark joined it. Then the scuffle. Leaves, steel, growling, whining. Silence. Elaine's breath caught. Copper surged forward, but she caught his collar just in time. "No," she whispered, more plea than command. Huck stepped beside them now, tense, and the sound he made, it wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was deep, guttural, vibrating from somewhere low in his throat. Not loud, not meant for them, the forest answered. A crack of movement from the brush line, and two men emerged from the dark like they'd never left it. Flashlights cut across the clearing in sharp, twitchy beams. Roy was in front, shotgun in one hand, a leash in the other, dragging a squat, wide-shouldered hound that was still yanking at its collar, foam dripping from its mouth. Behind him, another man, taller, silent, carrying a rifle slung across his chest. Elaine stepped out onto the porch. "I told you to stay off my land," she said, her voice calm but flat. Roy didn't raise the gun, not yet. "Saw fresh tracks," he said. "Same as before, big ones. Thought you might be keeping company." Copper snarled, teeth bared. Roy's eyes flicked to the dog, then to Huck. The flashlight landed on him for only a moment, but it was enough. The blanket, the frame, the dark eyes not quite human but not far enough to ignore. Roy's lip curled. "What the hell is that?" Elaine stepped between them, slow and deliberate. "He's mine," she said. "That ain't a he. That's a damn monster," Roy spat. "You've been harboring it, feeding it. You realize what people would pay to see something like that, or shoot it?" The taller man shifted his grip on the rifle. Huck didn't move, but his breathing changed. Elaine didn't look back, but she felt it. The tension in his shoulders, the coil building in his frame, like a held-back thunderclap. Roy raised the shotgun, not to fire, but enough. "You need to move," he said. Copper growled louder. Elaine stayed where she was. "No." The second man flinched at the word, like it slapped something old and buried inside him. He glanced toward Roy, unsure. Roy stepped forward. That's when Huck made the sound. It started low, below hearing, really, but climbed quickly. Not a scream, not a roar, a rattle, a pulse, a vibration that moved through the floorboards and the trees and the men's chests like the earth itself was warning them. It cut through the clearing, cracked like ice underfoot. Then the forest answered again. A shape stepped from the dark behind Roy. Massive, silent, broad as a barn door and almost as tall. The Bigfoot silhouette was backlit by moonlight caught in the fog, its eyes catching the dim glow like polished glass. It moved with terrifying calm, each step slow, deliberate. Not hiding, not rushing. Roy turned. He froze. The flashlight in his hand trembled slightly. The dog stopped growling. The second man took a single step back. The creature didn't roar. It didn't charge. It just stood there, breathing, watching, its chest rising slow and heavy, its head tilted just slightly like it was reading the air for what came next. Elaine said nothing. Huck stepped forward. The big one saw him. A flick of acknowledgement passed between them, brief but undeniable. Family. Copper moved beside Huck, not barking, not afraid. The second man whispered, "Roy," but Roy didn't answer. The Bigfoot took one more step. That was all it took. The dog yelped and tore free of the leash, running into the trees without a sound. The second man turned and bolted after it. Roy stayed frozen for half a beat too long, then backed away, gun lowered now, mouth slightly open. He never fired. He never spoke. The Bigfoot didn't pursue. It just raised one enormous hand, palm flat against its own chest. Then, slowly, it lowered its arm. Huck mirrored the movement. Elaine watched without blinking. Roy stumbled back toward the trail, boots tripping over roots. He didn't look back. He didn't speak again. The woods closed behind them, and then the clearing was quiet again. The Bigfoot stepped toward the porch, just close enough for the boards to creak slightly under its weight. It didn't come all the way, just enough. Then it bent down and placed something on the edge of the step. A stone. Round, perfectly smooth. It stood back up, nodded once, then vanished into the trees like smoke. Elaine exhaled for the first time in minutes. Copper sat down. Huck didn't move. Not yet, but something in him had changed. A piece had clicked into place. A wire pulled tight had finally found slack. Elaine knelt and picked up the stone. It was still warm from the Bigfoot's hand. She closed her fingers around it, looked up into the trees. For a moment, nothing. Then 3 soft knocks echoed from deep in the woods. Not angry, not rushed, just steady. Close, welcoming. She looked down at Huck. "You called him," she whispered. He looked at her and nodded. The forest had changed, not in the way light shifts through pine needles, or how bird song fades with the season. This was deeper, like the land had drawn a slow breath, holding it just beneath the moss and bone. Elaine felt it the moment she stepped outside, that quiet weight hanging in the air. Neither dread nor joy, just stillness before something sacred. The knock had come just after twilight. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And then again, 3 more, each one spaced evenly. Not loud, not forceful, but steady, clear. Carried on no wind, yet somehow echoing through every wall of the cabin like it came from inside the wood. Like the house remembered the sound from long before. Elaine stood at the porch's edge now, her hands clasped, breath caught somewhere in the middle of her chest. Copper sat to her right, unmoving, ears low. Huck stood just behind her, eyes trained on the tree line, his posture like a drawn bow. No one spoke. From the south ridge, a figure emerged. Broad, tall, familiar. The father. Each footstep was slow, as if it honored every inch of ground it crossed. His shoulders brushed low limbs without bending. His hands hung at his sides, massive and open, the fur along his arms rippling gently with movement. His eyes were soft but unreadable, like water that held stars but never gave them back. From the opposite side, another figure appeared. It moved quieter, shorter by a few inches, but no less commanding. She stepped through fog like it parted for her. The mother. Her eyes were the first to lock onto Elaine. Not hostile, not cautious, just deeply aware, as if this meeting had been waiting longer than any of them knew. In her hand, she held a woven ring of cedar and dried moss. Inside it, carefully placed, were smooth pebbles and what looked like the tip of an antler, polished by time. Elaine didn't step forward, but she didn't move back either. Huck stood still for a long moment, his small shoulders trembling once, then twice, and then he ran, not out of fear, but like a child returning home after a long illness. He stopped just short of them, looked up. The father knelt first, dropping to one knee in a single motion that sent a shudder through the soil. His great arms opened. Huck hesitated for half a breath, then fell into him. The mother came forward slower. She didn't touch Huck. Not yet. Her eyes scanned him first, checked his wounds, smelled his hair. Her hand hovered just above his head for a moment, then touched, firm, gentle, final. A sound rose from her throat. Not a growl, not a word, but something ancient. Elaine didn't understand it, but she felt it. Copper stayed at Elaine's side, tail swaying once, then twice. Huck turned back toward them, walked slowly, then stopped halfway between both worlds. He looked at Elaine, eyes shimmering with something far older than years, then stepped forward. Just one pace, close enough to reach her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, not tightly, not like a child, but with reverence. Elaine's hands moved on their own, one to his back, one to his hair. She held him a moment longer than he did her. When he pulled away, his eyes didn't leave hers. She nodded once, mouth trembling. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "Go home." He hesitated, reached up, and laid his hand against his own chest, just like the father. Elaine mirrored the motion, fingers flat over her heart. The mother stepped closer to the porch now, not up the steps, just near. She extended the woven ring in her hand, placed it on the ground before the first step, then backed away. No words, no sound, just the act. Elaine dropped to one knee, picked it up. It was damp, cool, solid. A gift, or a seal. Something sacred passed between women. Then, from deep in the woods, to the left and right, and finally, straight ahead. 3 knocks, then 3 more, then 3 more. Different tones, different directions, like a chorus. An invitation, or a farewell. Copper let out a low chuff. Elaine straightened. The father turned first, guiding Huck with one hand on his back. The mother followed behind, her hand trailing lightly through the mist. None of them looked back, but the air still held their presence. As they crossed the invisible line where clearing became forest, where light no longer filtered clean, a final sound stopped the night. One soft knock, then silence. Elaine exhaled. She stood on the porch until the moon rose. She didn't move when the wind picked up. She didn't speak when the trees bent in that low, groaning way that only happened when the world shifted. Because something had ended, and something else had just begun. The sun was gone before she even noticed it had begun to set. That kind of dusk, the slow, syrup-thick kind, had a way of sneaking up on her this time of year. By the time Elaine lit the lamp, the sky had turned the color of dying embers, and the porch shimmered beneath a soft layer of ground fog that clung low to the grass like it didn't want to leave. There was a quietness in the air. Not silence exactly, but a hush, like the woods were holding their breath. She stood by the window, hand resting on the sill, eyes drifting toward the tree line. Nothing moved. Not the deer, not the pines, not even the wind. But she knew something was coming. She'd felt it since morning. Copper had been restless all day, tail flicking without rhythm, ears tilting toward the backwoods every few minutes. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, but he paced. Checked the porch twice, then lay by the door like a soldier waiting for orders. Elaine had said nothing. She didn't need to. It wasn't fear, it was knowing. Then, right as the last line of light broke across the tin roof and shattered like silver glass, it happened. 3 knocks. Not rushed, not desperate, just solid, familiar. Then nothing. Elaine didn't move right away. She let the quiet settle again, let her breath fall back into her chest. She turned down the lamp and opened the door, and there they were, standing just outside the mist. Not quite hidden, not fully revealed. The forest behind them bent gently, like it had made space for their return. They didn't step forward at first. They just stood there, shapes etched in the dying light, taller than the trees seemed to allow, broader than they'd been before. The father, the mother, and Huck. He had grown. Not taller, not larger, but different. Stronger in the way time sometimes folds into itself. His frame filled out. His posture had changed. He wasn't trembling anymore. He stood with his shoulders set, feet planted like the land belonged to him now too. Elaine felt something rise in her throat, soft and sudden. She blinked it away. The mother moved first. She stepped out from the line of trees, her hands cupped before her chest. In them, a ring, woven tighter than the last, its center lined with smooth white stones and a curled piece of dried meat. Venison, Elaine thought, cured, perhaps smoked. A gift, not of peace, not of barter. Oh, thanks. She knelt slowly at the edge of the porch and laid the ring on the first step, then rose and stepped back, saying nothing. Her movements were deliberate, measured, a ritual. The father stepped forward next. He placed his hand against his chest, pressed it once, firm and silent, then bowed his head, not low, but deep enough it made something in Elaine's heart twist. Like she was being thanked not just for what she had done, but for something she hadn't yet understood. Then Huck came. He didn't run. He didn't hesitate. He simply walked the rest of the distance, barefoot through the damp grass, until he was face to face with her. She hadn't realized her hand had moved until it found his shoulder. He looked up at her, and in those amber eyes, she saw everything. The river, the hurt, the fear, and the healing. He reached up and laid his hand against his chest, like his father had. Then he did something he hadn't done before. He stepped forward and embraced her. Elaine didn't hold back, her arms wrapped around him, and for one long, wordless moment, she let herself fall into the quiet rhythm of his breath. Copper circled once, then laid at their feet, head resting gently against Huck's ankle. He made a small sound, content maybe, or maybe something more protective. Huck reached down, rubbed behind his ear, and the dog closed his eyes. The mother stepped forward again, but not to speak, not to take. She did something unexpected. She leaned down and, with the barest motion, touched her forehead to the corner of the porch. Not a full bow, just a brush, like a kiss left on the edge of sacred ground. Elaine's breath caught. Her hand rested on her chest. She knew now. There was a line between them, not drawn in dirt or bark, but in reverence. A boundary both could live with, a language without words. And in that moment, the rift closed. No conflict, no bargain, just balance. Then, slowly, one by one, they turned. The father led, the mother followed, and Huck lingered. He looked back one last time, not as a child lost, but as someone found. Elaine didn't wave. She simply smiled. "I'll be right here," she whispered. "Always." And then he vanished into the fog. The woods held him like they'd been waiting. When the silence returned, it wasn't empty. It was full of trust, of endings, of something sacred being seen and honored. Elaine stepped inside, shut the door behind her, and let her hand fall to the table. There, on the wooden surface, still warm from her palm, was the cedar ring. She picked it up gently and placed it beside the folded blanket, the one her son had once clutched every night before bed, the one that had been empty for so long. Now, side by side, they sat there, the past and the present, loss and return, two worlds, not blended, but finally known to each other. And then, just as she sat in the rocker, letting her breath settle again, it came. 3 knocks, soft, distant, and then the faintest rustle of pine, like a forest saying thank you. In the quiet that settles after every storm, we find space to remember what it means to belong, to be seen by something larger than ourselves, and to see, in turn, the world through eyes both curious and kind. There is a delicate balance between holding on and letting go, between the fierce love that drives us to protect and the gentle wisdom that teaches us to respect invisible boundaries. In that balance, we learn that home is not merely a place on a map, but a circle of trust drawn by the heart. Across time and memory, we carry wounds made by loss and by hope. Yet it is in these openings, where heartbreak meets compassion, that we discover our deepest strength. We come to understand that compassion is not a weakness, but the very mortar that bound our communities in ages past and holds us together still. When we extend our hand in healing, we acknowledge our shared fragility and plant a seed of renewal in the soil of our shared existence. The forest does not judge. It listens. Its rhythms remind us that healing takes time, that every broken branch can nurture new growth, and that every echo of fear can become a call to courage. In learning to hear the subtle knocks, to recognize the unspoken offerings, we awaken to an ancient dialogue between all living things. This dialogue does not demand that we erase our differences, but that we honor them, respecting the line between worlds while celebrating the ties that bind us. May we carry forward this lesson in our own lives, to honor those who come to us in need, to meet them with open hearts, and to trust that kindness can bridge even the deepest divides. Let us remember that gratitude is a gift we give ourselves, and that every act of understanding ripples outward in ways we may never fully see, but that shape the world all the same. Thank you for joining this journey at the edge of shadow and light, where fear becomes faith and distance gives way to belonging. If this story moved you, if it stirred memories of your own quiet crossroads, please share your thoughts below. Your voice adds depth to our conversation and helps this community grow. Don't forget to follow for more tales that weave heart, courage, and mystery into every scene. And subscribe to stay connected as we continue exploring the paths that connect us all.